And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
And we come to the unofficial end of summer, a sad time for us all. The cicadas are buzzing, the days are getting shorter, the nights are getting cooler. Friday night has lights all over football fields across the country, and we're into the fall schedule, which means the unofficial opening of the real campaigns for governor and U.S. Senate across the country. And here in my home state of Pennsylvania, we've got presidents and former presidents coming in to campaign on behalf of their chosen candidates. Joe Biden coming to Pennsylvania earlier in the week to tell us to vote for Josh Shapiro for Senate and John Fetterman for governor. Think about that. Well, he came back, of course, and stood in front of Independence Hall, that venerated building where our founding fathers sat and created this great republic, and used his time to demonize 70 million Americans, his fellow citizens, for being Republicans and MAGA Republicans in particular. What made that particularly despicable was the fact that it was not a political visit, at least ostensibly. It was paid for by the taxpayers. It was part of the official executive branch of the United States government that he was speaking on behalf of that night. Really terrible, especially from someone who's constantly lecturing us about unity and getting together and harmonizing. He had a very, very interesting twist on who the bad guys and who the good guys were in that speech. And he's been talking this week about law and order and saying we've got to fund the police. This is a very different Joe Biden and a very different Democrat Party than just a few weeks ago. But they realized their message wasn't working. It still isn't, and these races are really heating up. And sticking with the Pennsylvania theme, Emerson Polling came out this week with one that shows both races essentially margin of error races. That means that these are the tightest races you could possibly imagine at a stage in the campaign when typically Republicans are lagging pretty significantly behind, because Pennsylvania is still a state where Democrats dramatically outnumber Republicans. So there's good news there, because as the narrative begins to get fleshed out, people are saying, I'm voting Republican in the fall and for Dr. Oz and Senator Mastriano. There's supposed to be, or was supposed to have been, a debate next week between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. It's not going to happen. And John Fetterman alluded to his problems recovering from his stroke. And obviously we all pray for, hope for, and want a full and complete recovery on the part of Pennsylvania's lieutenant governor. That's politics aside. But he needs to be very, very clear with the people of Pennsylvania about his true state of health. He needs to release his attending physicians to speak directly with the media. He needs to make public the medical records that exist and let people know what both the short-term and long-term prognosis are for him, whether he's able to campaign or whether he's really able to serve in the United States Senate with all the pressures that come with that job. The people of Pennsylvania and its voters have the right to know. That's going to be a developing story over the course of the next couple of weeks, as is the Mastriano campaign, which is actually, according to the Emerson poll, in better shape than the Oz campaign, both in relatively good position, but the Mastriano campaign now has an opportunity to really take it to Josh Shapiro, and that's going to happen over the course of the next few weeks. These are going to be really pivotal races, and so vitally important because of Pennsylvania's position as the keystone state, both politically and geographically. And up in the last frontier, Alaska this week, a special election, and people need to remember this was a special election to fill the term of former Congressman Don Young, who passed away earlier this year after serving in the United States Congress for almost half a century. Think about that. He was elected when Richard Nixon was president, the longest serving member of Congress by a long shot. One of my Democrat friends was chortling over the fact that no Democrat had been elected in Alaska since the 1970s. Well, nobody had been elected in Alaska to the United States Congress except Don Young. They only have one congressman, and it was him for half a century. And so the National Democrats are trying to extrapolate something out of the Alaska results, which frankly don't really exist. This was a result of a really goofy system. I can't figure it out. And I'll tell you what, if anybody can call in, write in, or check in by email or by phone and explain to me exactly how that process in Alaska works, I'll figure out some sort of prize to give them on our program next week, because it is the most convoluted system of weighted voting you can possibly imagine. But there's a real election in November, and Sarah Palin will be back on the ballot. Let's see how that works out. And this week, a federal judge put a pause on the Department of Justice's efforts in the follow-up to the raid on President Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. This is bad news for the Justice Department, because it suggests that there are some real problems with what they did, and that they're having a hard time justifying the actions that they took. And it also suggests that there's going to be some sort of third-party review, whether by an arbitrator, a mediator, or an ombudsman. There's going to be a review of this by a third party. That's really necessary to help restore confidence in our Department of Justice, which has been so badly shaken over the course of the past few months, not just by the raid at Mar-a-Lago, but by a whole plethora of activity on the part of Merrick Garland and the rest of the Department of Justice, politicizing and weaponizing the criminal justice system in this country, which ought to send a chill down the spine of every American. And finally, the world mourns the loss of Mikhail Gorbachev this week. At age 91, he passed away, the last leader of the Soviet Union, and someone whose openness and perestroika really helped pave the way, with the pressure brought by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and St. John Paul II to bring down the Soviet-style communism of the Cold War. And the Cold War began to thaw because of Mikhail Gorbachev. I had the opportunity to meet him on a couple of occasions, and the one that really struck me was at President Ronald Reagan's funeral, when Mikhail Gorbachev was greeted by so many, not just Americans, but world leaders, as a true hero, which in many respects he was. So may he rest in peace. And as we celebrate and observe Labor Day and celebrate the tremendous accomplishments of the working men and women of America who built the greatest nation in the history of civilization, may everybody have a fabulous Labor Day, because for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.